how long this text message is, or how he words things to Jodi in this text message?
Well, there are veiled threats in it, and I mean the threats, are sort of nondescript, some of them, but some of them are talking about telling people that she cares about. I don't know what crazy things he's talking about. I don't know if he's talking about the sexual things. I can't imagine that would be there because that would include him. So I'm not certain what he's talking about.
Is the important part to you the fact that he's threatening to talk badly about her to her closest friend?
That's one of the things, and then he talks about feeling the wrath, and I'm not sure, your mind goes where your mind goes. So when someone would say that, and I've had people who I work with who make these nondescript kind of threats, but they're threats, and they sort of undermine somebody's basic security. If somebody you care about and somebody you love makes threats towards you, even if they are not specific, they still can be very undermining.
What about somebody who makes a threat of "feel my wrath" when he's already kicked her and broken her finger?
Well, that has, once again...
The statement in the text message, not "feel my wrath," it's "feel the wrath."
So when somebody says "feel the wrath," well, and let me just double check. When somebody says "feel the wrath," whether it's his wrath or the wrath, does that make any difference to the person themselves, do you think? When somebody has been choked, when someone has been kicked, when they have had their finger broken, when they have been slapped across the neck or the face by one person, and that person tells them "feel the wrath," what does that do? Is that abusive?
I think it's abusive. I think most battered women would think. Okay.
Is this something that battered women in general have to deal with?
It depends on the level of abuse in the relationship, but if someone makes a threat and you care about that someone and there's been a history of abusive behavior prior to that, it's going to have significant meaning to you.
So in other words, when somebody who you love is saying these horrible things to you, is that more significant than someone you don't know? Is that what you mean?
No, I'm saying because it has happened, and because you've seen it happen, then it has meaning.
So in other words, it's just not a veiled threat.
It's a veiled threat that's attached to reality.
Okay. All right. So at this point in time, do you continue to characterize this relationship as abusive?
Yes.
I'm showing you what's been in evidence as Exhibit 445. This is text messages between Mr. Alexander and Ms. Arias on April 8th, so this is just the next day. And we start up top where he's talking about her leaving something behind when she moved. Did you speak to Ms. Arias about the context of these text messages?
Yes, yes, Mr. Alexander had gotten a picture for her, and she wanted him to sign it, and he signed it, and then she forgot and left it when she was packing. She forgot to include that, and he was upset about it.
All right. And is that how this argument seems to start, with him being upset that she left it?
Yes.
Behind?
Yes.
And he's talking about, he says, "Thanks a freaking lot for having me sign that drawing, ink, and then deciding you were going to leave it. If it's not one thing, it's another with you. Always drama." Right?
Yes.
And her response is, "It doesn't sound like it's me that's being dramatic, dear. Call ASAP." Right?
Yes.
So her response to his text message is somewhat innocuous, right?
Sustained.
How do you take her response?
I take it as her sort of coming back at him and saying, it's not me that's being dramatic, it's you.
Okay. And he responds immediately with, well, he responds about 11 minutes later saying, do not call back. I'm sick of you playing stupid and dealing with childish tactics, right?
Yes.
And then he goes on for another text talking about it was a stupid-ass way of ruining yet another of mine. And does he talk about her ruining his days?
Yes, he does.
And he says, bitter feelings are brewing in me towards you, right?
Yes.
And he says he's going to have a genuine dislike for her if she keeps this behavior up. Is that the general idea?
Yes.
And the behavior that he's talking about is that she forgot a picture at his house when she moved.
Yes.
And he's asking her to stop it before he starts seeking revenge.
Yes.
When he starts talking about revenge, is that something that can be seen as a threat to someone who's already been kicked and choked and had a broken finger?
Yes.
How do you take her response? She starts it with sorry. How do you take her? What do you make of it?
Well, it's a pattern that she seems to have, which is when he gets really upset, she apologizes for her behavior.
And is that what she's doing in this conversation?
Sounds like it to me.
And she tells him, if you burn it, I'll understand. Just try to have a good day. Don't worry, be happy.
Yes.
So is there anything in here that she responds in a mean or a violent way back to him?
No.
And in response to her telling him to have a good day, he responds with another long text. Is that right?
Yes.
He tells her that it was rude and inconsiderate for her to forget the picture, right?
Yes, he goes on and on.
Okay. And does he talk about how he's trying to save his house?
Yes.
And that he doesn't believe that she's sorry.
Yes, he doesn't believe she's sorry.
And that if she was sorry, that you wouldn't continue onward with this stuff.
Yes.
And again, this fight is about the fact that she left a picture, right? At his
Yes.
house.
Yes.
And does he tell her that if he had done the same thing to her, she would cry for weeks?
Yes, he does.
Is that something that you've seen common, that people comment about Jodi crying, being a crier?
Yes.
What have you seen?
I've seen Mr. Alexander describe her as crying.
And written
Overall.
Oh, okay.
In written communications, he has described her as a crier, and I believe it was Mr. McCartney. I'm not sure if it was Mr. McCartney. I think it was Mr. McCartney who also described her as a crier.
A previous boyfriend of hers?
Yes.
Okay. That basically when she gets upset, she cries?
Yes.
And is that what Mr. Alexander is saying here? That you cry for weeks?
Yes.
And he talks about how he'll give her motivation to quit screwing with me, right?
Yes.
And again, is that something that can be considered threatening for someone who's already been choked and kicked and had a broken finger and
Yes.
slapped and hit?
Yes.
After that long text to her, we see her response. And again, what do you make of her response?
Well, a couple things. I think one thing is that she's apologizing again, and I think trying to de-escalate the situation. But she's also talking about distance as making sort of clears her head a little bit.
because at this point in time, she's now away from him, right, in California?
Yes, she is.
All right, and is this something, you said de-escalation?
Yes.
What does that mean that she's doing?
It means that she's trying to calm the situation down, that when he gets upset and gets angry, that there are two things that seem to be consistent. One is apologizing and being sorry, and the other is being sexual.
All right, so here we see her responses that she talks about how good she feels that they're separated. Is that right?
Well, she feels good, but she thinks it's going to be better for both of them.
Okay. And does she tell him that she loves him?
Yes, she does.
And does she say nice things to him, that she's happy and thankful?
Yes.
And then does she blame herself for leaving the picture to just chalk it up to one last ditzy thing?
Yes.
And then we see a couple hours later, she writes him to thank him for calling to say that. That was very nice of you. You see that?
Yes.
And then based on the rest of the text messages, does it seem that that tirade is over?
Yes, it does.
Did you review Mr. Alexander's journal entry? And I'm looking at April 8th, which I think you already have it up there.
Yes, I do.
It was all stapled together.
Yeah.
So on April 8th, is he talking about Jodi?
He's talking about Jodi and Deanna.
Okay. And what is the subject matter of his own words in his journal?
That he really wants to find someone that he can marry, and it will be a lot easier for him to do that now that Jodi's moved and Deanna is going to move.
Okay. And does he talk about being stressed for money?
Yes, he does. He talks about
And how does he feel about Lisa Andrews?
well, he misses Lisa Andrews. But he's really talking about Mimi.
Hearsay.
Besides missing Lisa Andrews, what is he really talking about? Summary, Judge.
Restate your question.
Besides missing Lisa Andrews, we know you're not quoting, right?
Yes.
Okay, so what else is he talking about? What subject matter do you get out of this?
Well, that he misses Lisa, and that he sort of feels like a fool for going after Mimi.
Okay, so in this particular journal entry, he's talking about, I guess, some of the women problems that he's having?
Yes. And that he feels like an idiot.
Okay. And this was from April 8th?
Yes.
So just close in time to when he just had this tirade with Jodi through text.
Yes.
All right, on April 19th of 2008, I'm talking about text messages.
April 19th?
April 19th.
Uh-huh.
And I just want to talk to you about the gist of what you get out of these particular messages from Mr. Alexander to Miss Arias.
There's a number of texts here, and basically, Mr. Alexander is offended because he feels that Miss Arias has insulted him about his speaking ability, and she's denying that. He goes through and talks about.
I asked for the gist.
He's talking about her painting. She says that he's.
She's writing the summary, and she shouldn't be reading the exhibit.
Abstain.
I'm
Do you
sorry.
need to,
Do I need to review it?
if you need to review it?
Sure.
And I'll ask you something more specific.
Okay.
All right, do you see in this exchange between the two of them, do you see any evidence of him or indication of Mr. Alexander guilting Miss Arias,
Yes.
about not helping him or not spending time with him?
Yes.
And in general, what is her response to that?
That she.
Whatever the exhibit number is in front of her.
Abstain.
This is a very long text message.
Okay.
Just so you
Well,
know.
in general, when she responds to him, is she doing what she has done in the past, where she's trying to take it down a notch?
Yes, she is.
At this point in time, she's in California, right?
Yes, she is.
So why would a woman in this particular situation even respond when you're getting nasty text messages from somebody who's not even in the same state with you? Why is it that people respond to something like that?
Well, they started their relationship, the first 8 months of it being in separate states. But she's still attached to him. She still has feelings about him, about the good parts of him that she really appreciates and cares about. And although she's got physical distance, she really doesn't have emotional distance. I mean, she has some emotional distance, but not enough to break it off.
Okay. And is this how we talk about how she's taking steps to distance herself, but she's not completely separated?
Exactly.
Is this something that you see with other battered women that they do, where they may take steps to get away, but yet they're not completely separating themselves?
Yes, and it's not uncommon at all for people to make multiple breaks and go back. In fact, Lisa Andrews talks about that. She talks about their relationship.
You're safe.
Abstain.
What about what Ms. Andrews had talked about with Mr. Alexander? Do you know this from reading emails of hers?
Yes.
And is the information that she talks about the way that she and Mr. Alexander's relationship go back and forth, is that something that's important to you
Yes.
in your ultimate consideration with the way that Mr. Alexander and Ms. Arias went back and forth?
Yes.
Based on your reading of her emails, what is the summary, what's the subject matter that you get from there that's important to your ultimate opinion?
That every time they break up, and they break up.
Approach.
So what is it that about the relationship between Lisa Andrews and Miss Alexander that is important to you, that you were just about to say?
Mr. Alexander's ability to win women back, and that Miss Andrews talks about every time that they break up, he addresses her concerns, and she feels connected to him again, and she says he can, he can always win her back, basically is the essence of it.
Okay. And is that something that you see as a pattern with the relationship with Miss Arias and Mr. Alexander?
Yes, I do.
So is it surprising to you then that Miss Arias would respond to his text messages or emails when she's in another state?
No, it's not surprising to me.
All right, and after the April 19th, 2008 text message that we were just talking about, on April 20th, the very next day, does Mr. Alexander send Miss Arias a very nice text message about talking about what he thinks of her?
Yes, he actually does. He's talking about.
Go ahead.
He's talking about going to a club.
Are you giving us a summary of it?
Yes.
Okay. May she continue, Judge?
He goes to a club and he emails or texts Jodi back and says that he really feels like she's one of the most beautiful women.
Sustained.
Are you giving us a summary of what the text message is?
Yes.
Okay. May she continue, Judge?
Why don't you restate the question?
All right. On April 20th, based on your reading of the text messages, do you know that Mr. Alexander is not with Miss Arias?
Yes, I do.
And do you know that he is in a club with presumably other women?
Yes.
And you know this based on what he's saying in his text message?
Yes.
And does he send a text message to Miss Arias?
Yes, he does.
And in that text message, does he compare her with the other women he has seen?
Yes, he does.
Hearsay.
Overruled.
Does he compare her to other women?
Yes, he does.
And does he compare her favorably?
Yes, he does.
In fact, does he compare her in a way that he talks about her inside beauty as well as her outside beauty?
Yes, he does.
Is it a very flattering text?
It's a very flattering text.
And this is just very next day after they argued, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Let's talk about, we've been talking about how you start to see the escalation in violence, both physical and emotional, right?
Yes.
And so now we're moving into some of the fights that they have in May. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, and when I'm talking about these fights, I mean, these are what we've discussed so far. Have you seen any fighting from Miss Arias in her response text messages?
No, I haven't.
And are these text messages, these rants that are coming, who are they coming from?
They're coming from Mr. Alexander.
Overruled.
Would you characterize what he has, would you characterize these long text messages that we just went through? How would you characterize them?
As tirades or rants.
Okay. And so, who are these tirades or rants coming from?
They're coming from Mr. Alexander
And being sent to whom?
to Miss Arias.
Okay, so let's talk about May 10th, and this is in evidence as Exhibit 448. All right. And actually, are you aware that these times are actually 7 hours ahead?
Yes, I don't get it, but I understand it.
Okay.
I've been told that.
All right. So if this is military time at 2:41 in the morning, 7 hours earlier would actually be May 9th. Do you agree?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So this one is incoming, meaning it's coming from Miss Arias. Is that right?
Yes.
Did you talk to Miss Arias about this group of text messages?
Yes, I did.
Do you have an understanding then as to this first message, whether it was intended for Mr. Alexander or not?
It actually was supposed to be sent to someone else, and it was accidentally sent to Mr. Alexander.
Okay. And after it was sent to Mr. Alexander, how is it that he responds? Is he upset?
He seems to be very upset.
All right. And we see him, in the next text message, we see him accusing her of being a liar, right?
Yes.
And based on your understanding of and reading through these text messages, is he upset with her because she's having communications with another man?
Yes.
And was she telling him about these communications with another man?
No, in fact, she was trying to keep it more to herself because he didn't want to know details of her life. So she's not completely honest with him because he doesn't want to know details.
Okay, and you're talking about a text message down here when Ms. Arias says that she was trying to move her business to a more private venue, and that he brought it up, and that she's a single girl and she's a single girl talking to some guy, and there's nothing wrong with that. Is that the context?
Yes.
And she talks about not being completely honest about him, not being completely honest about this other person with Mr. Alexander is a mistake, isn't it? That's what she's saying.
That I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, in other words, is she saying that by talking to Mr. Alexander about any interest she has in other men, is that a mistake for her to do?
She feels that he does not want to know the details.
And does he get upset when he learns any details of her ever speaking with someone else?
Yes.
And at this point in time, they're not supposed to be in a relationship anymore, right?
True.
And how would you characterize Mr. Alexander's behavior if he gets upset with Miss Arias for speaking with another man?
Well, it's jealous behavior.
Okay.
And jealous behavior can be very controlling.
And is that what you see in evidence of in these types of text messages?
Yes, the further away she gets and the more she pulls away, I think that the more jealous and insecure he probably gets. And that when he reacts in that way, what I've seen is when someone who has had the power starts to lose it, it's a scary proposition for them. And they begin to react. If they're controlling, they begin to react in more controlling ways.
Okay. So you're talking about you're talking about Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
And initially we talked, when they first met, we talked about the power differential and how Miss Arias looked up to him, right?
Yes.
And did you see a power differential
Yes.
in their relationship?
Yes.
Who had the power for most of their relationship?
It appeared, well, Mr. Alexander did.
Okay. And as she is moving away from him and making this move away from him, you were talking about losing power. Does that mean he loses power over her?
Yes. In her distancing, he doesn't have control.
Okay.
And when he doesn't have control, or when someone who tends to be jealous and more controlling loses control, it's a scary thing for them to lose control. That's been my experience with the men I've worked with who are jealous. Not everybody's jealous that I work with.
Oh, right. So when you say scary, is that talking about the emotion of fear?
Yes.
And what does fear, is there anything dangerous about somebody being fearful?